because based on his principles, if you know how many bucks are harvested in a state, and if you have an idea of how many bucks were not harvested in the state, all you need to do is apply his principles and reverse engineer, and you can come up, plus or minus 50,000, plus or minus 100,000, you can come up with how many deer you have living in that state at any given time. Because of course you can't defy the laws of mathematics, and just take Pennsylvania for example. We allegedly, theoretically killed 125,000 antlered deer, 124, but we'll call it, for the simplicity's sake, we'll say we killed 125,000 antlered bucks last year. Now we've been hitting our doe herd pretty hard. You need to ask yourself, how many bucks do you think you left in the woods? Did we leave 25,000 bucks in the woods? Did we leave 50,000? Did we leave 75,000? If we left 75,000 bucks in the woods, which I find very hard to believe, Pennsylvania deer hunters are some of the most efficient, tenacious, determined deer hunters in the country. Just go to camp somewhere or anywhere across this country and ask those outfitters, who can do it? Who can put it together? Pennsylvanians can put it together. They can kill some game. But if we assume that even if we left 75,000 bucks in the woods, and we killed 125, and we went into the season with a standing buck herd of 200,000, we had no more than 800,000 deer in the state at the start of this season. No more than 800,000 deer. And that's plus or minus 50,000 this way or that way. If you assume, as I do, that we didn't leave 75,000 bucks in the woods, historically, Pennsylvanians kill 75, 78, 82% of all standing antlered deer, we get them. And if we assume that we only left 25,000 bucks, we'll keep the math simple, and we started the year with the season with 150,000 bucks, we may have gone into this season with a standing herd of 600,000 deer. That is anything, and then we killed 400,000. That is why everyone's sightings are so low. Your sightings are low. You're riding up and down the roads. You're not seeing any deer because, metaphorically, there aren't any deer. We might have reduced this herd to 250,000 statewide is what we might have done. Now, I have the right to take worst case scenario and use those kinds of numbers because the Game Commission and those who are involved in the other end of this debate, they seem to have the right to exaggerate numbers. We never had 1.6 million deer. I'll wager my house and any amount of money anybody wants to wager on, we never had 1.6 million deer. If you divide 1.6 million deer by 5, if you do that, if you do your Severing-Haas ratios, we would have had to start the season with about 350,000 antlered deer in this state back in '99. Well, we only shot 203,000. We only shot 203,000. Pennsylvanians did not leave 150,000 bucks in the woods. It is just a physical impossibility. We're far more effective than that, and we cleaned your clock. We probably had, and prior to the ALT program and prior to the antler restrictions, the Game Commission was candid enough. The numbers they used were 90%. 85 to 90% of all antlered bucks were killed every hunting season. We put them under a lot of pressure and so forth. That's because our rifle season is too long. With 1 million hunters, we exposed our herd to mortality, with the exception of maybe Michigan, longer than any other state. And some of these big states, the Illinois and the Ohio's, 6-day season. They only got 250,000 hunters, and they expose that buck herd to mortality for 6 days. That's all they do. Minnesota, with its 750,000 hunters, they got a 9-day rifle season for bucks. Okay, Minnesota, or rather Wisconsin, culls about 70% of their buck herd every year. Michigan culls about 70% of their buck herd every year. The lower the percentage that you cull each year, the more deer you leave available next year to go into the next age group. Okay, and there's a little exercise in deer management called sex-age kill ratios. Whereas if you kill 50% of your buck herd this year, the other 50% is available to grow to 2.5 years old. Now, generally speaking, if you're killing 50% of your buck herd every year, you will kill 50% of those 2.5-year-olds the year after, and 50% of the 3.5-year-olds the year after. Now you reach a point that at 3.5 or 4.5 years old, those big bucks get so obvious and so watched. They don't really, that sex age kill ratio doesn't really carry out till 10 years or so, but in Maine it does. In Maine it does. There's always that percentage that's not getting killed, and that group is allowed to transition into the next age class. We didn't have trophies. We didn't put deer in the record books because we cleaned their clock every year. You can't have it both ways. You can't have long rifle seasons, drive the mountains, put groups together of 25, kill 90% of your antler herd, and then turn around and say, well, how come we don't shoot any trophies? Because you clean them out every year. You want to shoot trophies, you cannot, and thus is the origin of antler restrictions. Thus is the origin of, when you want deer to exist into older age classes, when you want to build a more diverse age class, you either have to reduce the time that the deer are exposed to mortality, or you have to implement something like antler restrictions, where you're taking a segment of the population and protecting it. There's no other way around it. Kentucky has 125,000 hunters, and 1/10 the hunters we have, 1/9 the hunters we have, 1/8 the hunters we have. Kentucky has a 16. Can't be done. You can't have long seasons and trophies too, unless you are Maine, unless you are Saskatchewan, unless you are somewhere where there is such light hunting pressure that the efforts of individual sportsmen make no difference whatsoever. Kentucky, you want to know a sleeper state? Kentucky is a sleeper state right now. Kentucky is producing, some really trophy class animals, 160 inches of horn, 180 inches of horn, just some monsters, over 200 inches of horn. Ohio did that this year too. Kentucky has 125,000 hunters, and 1/10 the hunters we have, 1/9 the hunters we have, 1/8 the hunters we have. Kentucky has a 16-day rifle season, but you don't have any hunters. You don't have any hunters, and they're killing 50 to 60% of their buck herd. That 40% of that buck herd is able to transition to the next year and the year after. And if you figure out the math, if we wanted to put the same pressure on our herd that Kentucky puts on their herd, we'd have to do a 3-day rifle season. At the end of 3 days, cut it off. And you would leave a significant portion of bucks in the woods to grow to the next age class. But that doesn't always work either. Deer are subject to mortalities, lots of mortalities, and they have done studies. It's hard to move deer from age class to age class to age class. And even in perfect conditions, in fenced conditions, without predators, without hunting pressure, for a deer to reach 5.5 years old, in some of the latest studies in Texas and down south, there's about a 30-35% success ratio of getting deer to be 5.5 years old, minimizing the mortality and risks that they're available to. It's very hard to stockpile wildlife. It's very hard to say, these 100 bucks, we're going to protect them this year, next year, next year. 5 years from now, I want to harvest those 100 bucks. Odds are you're going to harvest 30 of those bucks. The other 70 are just going to be gone through natural attrition. They're not going to be around to be harvested. So that's one of the dilemmas of wildlife management. Many people want to stockpile deer and turkeys and pheasants as if they're inventory on the shelf. But it's a cold world out there, and that doesn't always turn out to be true. So what I'm saying to you is that basically my estimates, we've been killing our deer very, very successfully for the last 5 years. You go back to 1999, we killed 203,000 bucks, and the next year we did kill another 203,000 bucks, but we increased opportunity. You see, when you increase opportunity, you expose your deer to more, to higher mortality. We had 2 years in a row that the harvest was 203,000, but the second year, then 2000, we had an increased opportunity to get that number up there. The next year, the buck harvest dropped to 169. The next year, it was 142. This year, it was 124. Not this year, 2004. And this year, I feel confident the buck harvest will drop to 90,000 is where the buck harvest will be. And we probably, went into the season with 500 to 600,000 deer, maybe a little bit